The day everything shifted started, with me locked out of a conference room I was supposed to be setting up. I was 28, 3 years into a mid-sized commercial real estate firm in downtown Toronto, doing the kind of work that kept everything running but never showed up on anyone's radar. Slide decks reformatted at 11 at night. Data pulled for directors who forgot to say thank you. Backup copies made for presentations that would have collapsed without them. I was good at it. I just wasn't visible because of it. That Tuesday in November, I had my laptop bag over one shoulder, a printed briefing packet under my arm, and a keycard that had stopped working sometime between Monday and that morning. I was standing in the hall outside the 31st floor boardroom when the elevator behind me opened and Katherine Voss stepped out. I'd seen her the way you see weather systems. From a distance. Aware that she existed, aware that she affected everything, not expecting to be personally involved. She was managing director of the firm's institutional investment division, the kind of title that made senior partners adjust their posture when she walked past. She had the calm of someone who had already decided how every room was going to go before she entered it. She gave me the kind of glance people give strangers in hallways, brief, categorizing, filed away. Then she kept walking toward the boardroom, pressed her card to the panel, and the light turned green. She held the door. I don't know why. I looked behind me to confirm she meant me, which probably told her everything she needed to know about where I thought I stood. She waited without saying anything, and I went in. The room was set up wrong. Not badly wrong. Whoever had booked it had arranged the chairs for a different kind of session, facing a screen instead of each other. I started moving them without being asked, repositioning the table setup while she pulled out her laptop at the far end. She watched me for about 4 seconds. "You're not from AV," she said. "No, I'm with analytics support. I was supposed to prep this room an hour ago." "Who rearranged it?" "Don't know, but it's wrong for what you need." She looked at the setup I'd moved, then back at me. "You know what I need? Quarterly partner review. You want the conversation going around the table, not at a screen." Something passed through her expression that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite not one. She went back to her laptop. I finished the setup and left. I figured that was the full story. Held a door, fixed a table. Nobody important would remember it by lunch. I was wrong about that. The crisis came at 2 in the afternoon. Not to me directly. It came to the floor in general, in the way corporate panic always does. Elevated voices behind glass walls, people moving faster than normal, assistants looking at each other instead of at their screens. The partner review had hit a problem. A major one. 2 versions of the acquisition analysis had been circulating, an older draft and the updated one, and somebody had pulled numbers from both into the final deck. A pension fund client from Vancouver was already in the room. The difference in projected returns between the 2 versions was significant enough that if they got to that slide before someone caught it, the meeting was over and so was the relationship. I heard this because I was in the open workspace adjacent to the boardroom, prepping notes for a different session that afternoon. I heard it, and I didn't wait for someone to tell me what to do. I pulled up the shared drive, found both versions, ran a comparison, identified the 4 slides with mismatched data, rebuilt them off the correct source file, exported a clean deck, printed it, and walked it into the boardroom before anyone inside had finished deciding who was responsible. Katherine looked at the package I set on the table, then at me. Is this corrected? All 4 affected slides. The figures now matched the March 18th final. I flagged the pages. She didn't ask how I knew which version was right. She just opened to the first flag page, checked the number, and nodded once. "Give me 4 minutes," she said to the room. I stayed by the wall. I don't know why I didn't leave. Instinct, maybe. Or the feeling that something wasn't finished. Halfway through the restarted presentation, the client's lead analyst raised a question about cap rate assumptions in the Calgary portfolio. Katherine paused. Not long, but I could see her pulling for the supporting data and coming up slightly short. I was already looking at my phone. I had the backup briefing I'd prepped 2 days earlier for a different meeting that happened to cover the same assets. I stepped forward, said her name quietly, and handed her the relevant page. She read it, used it. The conversation moved forward. When the clients left 40 minutes later, they were talking about next steps. Katherine came out of the room last. Most of the people who'd been panicking 2 hours earlier had dispersed to perform relief at their desks. She stopped beside me in the hall. Shh. What's your name? James. James Calloway. She studied me for a second. The way people look at something they're deciding whether to keep. You were in the room this morning. Dune. I moved the chairs. You also just saved this meeting. She said it without drama, like it was an accounting of facts. Come to my office at 5:30. Then she walked off, and I stood in the hallway not entirely sure what had just happened. At 5:30 I went up expecting a task, something to clean up, a file to restructure, the usual shape of being useful to someone more important than me. Her office was a corner unit on the 33rd floor, with views east over the lake. She was at her work table, not her desk, jacket folded over the back of her chair, reading through a document with a pen already moving. She pointed at the chair across from her without looking up. Sit. I sat. What followed wasn't a debrief. It was more like an audit. She wanted to know how I'd caught the version mismatch so fast, how I knew where to look, how I'd had the cap rate data already. I explained my system. I kept shadow backups of anything I touched, cross-referenced source files out of habit, because I'd been burned before by other people's versioning errors. She put the pen down and looked at me properly for the first time. How long have you been doing that? Since my first year. Who asked you to? Nobody. She was quiet for a moment. Then, walk me through the Pemberton file, the one we're presenting to the institutional committee in 3 weeks. I didn't ask why. I pulled up what I had on my laptop and walked her through it. She interrupted constantly, not to correct me, to push. What would the committee push back on? Where was the logic soft? Which numbers were real, and which were optimistic, and what was the difference between the two? It stopped feeling like a performance review. It started feeling like a conversation between two people who were thinking through the same problem. By 8 o'clock I was still there. Her assistant had gone home an hour earlier. She'd ordered dinner from somewhere on King Street, and we ate at the end of the conference table, while a winter rain started hitting the glass outside. It should have felt strange. It didn't. Not exactly. The pressure in the room was still there, but it had changed shape. Less hierarchy, more just. Two people trying to get something right. She asked where I'd gone to school. I told her, University of Guelph, Finance and Economics. Not Ivy, not Rotman. She didn't react the way I expected. And yet you think about risk differently than most of the people I pay twice what I pay you. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, I just don't trust numbers. I didn't trace myself. She tilted her head slightly. Say that in rooms. Don't whisper it at the junior level, and then defer upward when a director nods. That hit harder than she probably meant it to, because she was right. I had been doing exactly that for 3 years. After that night, she started pulling me in, not with a formal announcement. She didn't send an email to the floor saying things had changed. She just started copying me on material above my level, asking me directly instead of going through a team lead, texting from the back of a cab at odd hours, to ask if I'd looked at something yet. My days started bending around her schedule. And people noticed before I was ready for them to. The first sign was small. A senior analyst named Patrick. The kind of guy who called everyone on the junior floor buddy, with the particular warmth of someone who didn't know your name, started using my full name in meetings. Then a manager named Sandra asked why I was included in a sensitivity analysis chain that was meant for directors only. She smiled when she said it. The smile didn't reach anywhere real. Then, it got plainer. Patrick cornered me near the kitchen one Thursday and said, moving pretty quick for someone who was making copies 6 months ago. Making better copies than most people make decisions, I said. Jaw tightened. Must help to have the right person in your corner. He let that hang there, exactly where he wanted it. Before I could answer, Catherine's voice came from behind us. I don't know how long she'd been there. She looked at Patrick with the specific expression of someone recording information. Patrick, she said, I need the Riverside sensitivity pushed to me by end of day. Can you do that, or should I ask someone else? He said he'd do it. By Friday, he'd been moved off 2 cross-divisional files he'd been sitting on for months. Nobody explained the connection out loud. They didn't need to. That was when I started understanding what was actually happening. She wasn't just making use of me. She wasn't borrowing my skills and leaving me to manage my own, standing on the floor. She was actively shifting the ground under my feet, removing friction, taking people who had looked through me for years and forcing them, quietly, precisely, to recalibrate. And once I saw that, I couldn't stop seeing it everywhere. 3 weeks in, she took me to a client meeting in Ottawa she would normally have brought a director to. I was listed on the attendance sheet as analytical support. In reality, I spent 4 hours helping her read the room, adjust the pitch in real time, and catch the moment the client's risk officer started losing confidence in one of the projected timelines. Katherine shifted her approach based on something I passed her in a handwritten note. The meeting closed well. On the flight back, somewhere over Eastern Ontario, she asked what I wanted. Not small talk, not professional goals. She asked the way someone asks when they've decided the answer matters. I'm tired of being the person everyone trusts in private and forgets in public, I said. She looked out the window for a moment. That's already changing. The way she said it felt like a decision she'd already made, not a promise she was offering me. There was a dinner in February. Not business, not entirely. She asked on a Tuesday if I was free Thursday. I said yes before I'd thought about it clearly. We went to a restaurant on Yorkville I would never have chosen for myself. One of those places where the lighting is considered, and the staff recognize regulars without drawing attention to it. She'd been there before. Of course she had. Started as work. It kept slipping sideways. She asked what I was going to do with the next decade. I told her what I actually thought, not the version I'd rehearsed for performance reviews. She told me about a deal she'd chased for 2 years in her 30s that fell apart at the last stage, and how long it took her to understand that losing it had made her better at the thing she actually did. You don't act like most people at your level, she said at some point. How do most people at my level act? Cautious, in ways that protect them from risk and also from progress. She turned her wine glass. You're cautious in ways that protect the work. I didn't know what to do with that. I said, is that a compliment? It's an observation. Whether it's a compliment depends on what you do with it. Here. After dinner, we stood outside under the entrance awning while the February cold moved through the street. Her car was 3 minutes out. The city was doing what Toronto does in winter, pressing on regardless, taxis and streetcars, moving through the dark and the slush with total indifference. She turned toward me. Not much, just enough. You know why I keep pulling you into things above your level? She asked. I should have deflected. I didn't. Because I don't pretend to be more than I am, and I don't accept being treated as less. She was quiet for a moment, then, exactly that. The car wasn't there yet. Neither of us moved. When she looked at me again, there was something open in it that I hadn't seen in her face before. Not the executive version of Katherine, the one who managed rooms. The other one, the one who had apparently been making space for this without announcing it. I kissed her in the cold, the street noise around us, and the awning overhead. She kissed me back without hesitation, the same directness she brought to everything. When the car arrived, we got in. She gave her address. I understood what that meant. She didn't become distant afterward. That was the thing I hadn't predicted. Most people, after something like that, introduce a kind of managed distance. Professional by day, compartmentalized, careful. Katherine did the opposite. She got more certain, more direct. Like whatever question had been sitting between us had been answered, and she didn't see the point of pretending otherwise. The following Monday, I was reassigned. Officially, it was a cross-divisional analytical support role. In practice, it meant I stopped handling the backfill work that had eaten my weeks for 3 years and started sitting in rooms where real decisions were made. She didn't make a speech about it. She just started putting me in front of the right people. And once she did that, no one wanted to be the first to question it to her face. The moment it landed for real was during a valuation review in March. A director named Craig had been in the room for 15 years and had the specific comfort of someone who'd never really been challenged in it. I was partway through walking the team through a discounted cash flow sensitivity when he interrupted. I think we have enough senior input on this. The table went quiet, not loud quiet, the kind where people keep their expressions still because they know a line just got drawn. Katherine set her pen down. No, Craig, we don't. Let him finish. I finished. She backed the analysis. The room worked off my structure for the rest of the session. Craig sat with it. He didn't have a choice. That was new. So was the travel. Vancouver in April for a pension fund review. Calgary in May for a site walkthrough with an infrastructure client. I was listed as analytical support on the travel requests. I was wherever she needed me, in the car from the airport, in the lobby briefings, in the pre-meeting rooms, cutting anything that didn't need to be said. She liked having me close. I could feel it. Not just at night. In motion. In those sealed pockets of time between high-level commitments, where she could drop the public version of herself and say exactly what she was thinking without editing it first. Afternoon in Calgary, back at the hotel before an evening session, a package was waiting at the front desk with my name on it. No card. Inside was a charcoal blazer in my exact size, better cut than anything I owned, clearly selected by someone who had paid attention. I texted her, "This is a problem." Her response came back in under a minute. "Wear it tomorrow." I wore it. The next morning I caught my reflection in the elevator mirror and didn't quite recognize what I saw. Not because I looked expensive. Because I looked like someone the room might take seriously before deciding whether to. And they did. That was the part that stayed with me. Back in Toronto, the floor dynamics kept shifting. The silence when I walked into the kitchen. The manager from legal, who asked too casually why I was copied on a regulatory review above my current designation. A colleague from capital markets who smiled at me in the hall and said with a specific kind of precision, "You seem to be everywhere lately." Patrick tried once more. He stopped me outside the 11th floor printers and said quietly, with the tone of someone being reasonable, "You know how this looks, right?" How does it look? Like you found a shortcut." I thought about what to say for a second. Then I said, "You've had 3 years to find the same shortcut. It was always in the work." He had nothing for that. He walked away. The real test came in June. A major refinancing deal the firm had been building toward for 8 months was approaching its final review. The kind of file that changed who got taken seriously for the next few years. Katherine had been the lead on it from the beginning. She knew the client, knew the pressure points, knew exactly where the opposing counsel was likely to push back and where they were bluffing. The week before the final session, she got pulled to an emergency board matter in Montreal that couldn't move. She called me at 7 in the evening. I was still in the office. "I need you to take the room tomorrow," she said. I heard the sentence. I still asked her to repeat it. "The final review. You're going in my place." "Katherine, you know this file better than anyone. The client trusts you. If you're not there, they trust competence. You have the file, you have the relationships, and you know the number that matters to them better than any director on this floor does." A pause. Stop arguing from a version of yourself that stopped being accurate 6 months ago. That stayed in me for a long time. He sent me the updated legal language, the finance sign-off, a 2-page brief on the client's current priorities, and a note that she'd call the moment I was out of the room. The morning of, I was in the back of a firm car heading to a glass tower in the financial district, with 3 marked-up binders, both phones, and the kind of focus that comes from knowing there's no one behind you this time. The client team was already there when I arrived. Senior people, the kind who notice things without saying they do. One of them looked at the empty seat where Katherine was supposed to be, and then at me. I introduced myself. "James Calloway, Institutional Advisory." I said Katherine sent her regards and that she'd be available for any follow-up questions directly. Then I opened my folder and started. I knew the file. I knew which projections they'd want to push on and why. I knew the clause in the refinancing structure that their counsel was going to flag, and I had the response for it before they finished the sentence. When the conversation stalled on a fee structure question, I walked them through the comparison analysis I'd built independently. One Katherine hadn't asked for, one I'd done because I didn't trust the existing version to hold under scrutiny. It held. 2 hours later, we had terms. I stepped out of the boardroom into a quiet hallway, with afternoon light, cutting through the windows, and called Katherine. She picked up on the second ring. "Done," I said. Pause. Long enough that I could hear the Montreal street noise behind her. "Terms confirmed?" Signed off. They want the documentation by end of week. Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice had something in it I hadn't heard before. Not warmth exactly, more like satisfaction. The real kind, not the performed kind. You already knew you were ready for that, she said. I wasn't sure. I was. A beat. Go celebrate something. I'll be back Thursday. I stood in that hallway for a minute after the call ended. The city was moving past the windows the way it always does. Indifferent and constant. Somewhere in the building behind me, a file that had taken 8 months to reach this point was finally closed. A year ago, I was reformatting decks nobody read and refilling the printer before 7 a.m. in case someone senior needed it. I had a keycard that didn't always work and a name people used when they needed something fixed and forgot when they didn't. Now I was the person Katherine Voss sent when she couldn't be there herself. I didn't have a clean way to explain everything that had happened between those two versions of me. The work was real. The ability had always been there. But she had seen it before I'd learned how to show it. And she had put her credibility behind it before I had any of my own to offer. And the strangest part, the part I kept turning over on the drive back to the office, was that understanding all of that made me want to stay, not pull away. Because whatever this was between us, complicated and unannounced and quietly changing everything, it wasn't something I could explain away as convenience or circumstance. She had looked at a person, no one was watching, and decided he was worth the attention. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. I think about the version of me standing in that hallway outside the 31st floor boardroom. Keycard not working, waiting for someone to notice. That guy wasn't lazy. He wasn't unqualified. He just hadn't learned yet that the people who get seen are rarely the ones who wait to be introduced. What changed wasn't luck. Looking back honestly, there's a clear line of cause and effect running through everything that happened. When I fixed the presentation file that afternoon without being asked, I wasn't performing. I wasn't calculating. I just couldn't watch something break when I had the ability to stop it. That instinct, doing the right thing even when no one would notice if you didn't, is what Katherine actually saw. Not the output. The instinct behind it. And I think that's the part most people underestimate. Integrity isn't something you perform in high-stakes moments. It's the habit you build in the invisible ones. The ones where nobody's watching, where the easier choice is to close your laptop and go home. Those moments either build you, or they quietly hollow you out. And you don't always notice which is happening until it's too late. The intellectual side of it mattered just as much. I had spent 3 years building shadow backups, tracing numbers nobody asked me to trace. Reading files above my level because I was curious about how the whole thing worked, not just my corner of it. That curiosity didn't have an audience. It wasn't strategic, but it compounded, the way real knowledge always does, until the moment came when I had exactly what the room needed, and I'd had it ready for 2 days already. I've seen genuinely smart people stall out in their careers because they stopped asking questions the moment they had enough answers to be comfortable. Comfort is the thing that gets you, not failure. Comfort. And then there's the part that's harder to talk about. The persistence through the period when Patrick was making comments near the printers, and the manager from legal was asking questions with a smile that meant the opposite of friendly. That stretch tested something different than competence or integrity. It tested whether I actually believed the work was worth it independent of whether anyone was clapping. Katherine could clear some of the friction. And she did, but she couldn't do that work for me. Nobody can. The only way through that kind of pressure is to decide, privately and without ceremony, that you're not going to let other people's discomfort with your progress become your problem. What I carry from all of it is simpler than I expected. Do the work correctly when it costs you something to do so. Keep learning past the point where you feel like you already know enough. And don't stop when it gets uncomfortable. Because the discomfort is usually just the resistance that separates where you are from where you're actually capable of going. Katherine saw something in me before I had the standing to show it, but she could only see it because it was already there. That part was always mine.